Much lower chance. Make your life. Yes, currently 11. Yeah.
Right, so I will call the meeting back to order, please. And I'm just going to start with a brief procedural motion. Councillor Maynard had to leave, so I will move that we accept her apologies for an early departure. Do I have a seconder? I do, Councillor Old. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
And so we'll now move on. Jim, would you be free to come to the front of the room, please? Take a seat and thank you.
Is this the Naughty Boys chair?
No, no, not at all. It's the chair for everybody. And anyway, Jim, before we start, I wish to apologise to you for the way I spoke to you the last time you were here. And I also wish to say that we appreciate your well thought out submissions that do come to us. So you're most welcome. And the next 10 minutes is yours.
I accept your apologies. Thanks very much for offering it. When I do come, I've made a lot of research and so forth to come and give up some time that I've been working for. And these days I seem to work to be able to pay my rates. This submission, my commission, it's also performed by the Citizens Promoting Quality Community Governance. And that's on the back. Council had the opportunity to create a fair and equitable rating system, but have failed. The process that council have followed does not instill confidence. All council have done is rearranged the chairs so as to come out with similar to what we have now. Firstly, the workshop on the rating review should have included some ratepayers that have shown an interest in and had some knowledge in the subject. Instead, council's first workshop was open to the public as spectators, and after that, the public were excluded. At a break in proceedings, I was not allowed to discuss anything with Mr. Jones, council's rating expert. We have been denied requests for copies of material Mr. Jones presented to council and any working papers. The actions of council does not go well for transparency. We don't know what council are hiding from us or what other options council explored, or was what has been presented the only option. The only thing that is transparent is that farmers pay many, many, many times more of those functions funded by the bulk general rate in urban. Do council agree that the 2018 rates review was not a complete rates review and cannot be relied on? Yes or no? Seeing there's silence, I would take that you agree. In the consultation document, council have made some correct statements and then gone on with no logic or common sense and contradicted those statements. 1, page 26, 4.1. The community as a whole means all residents and ratepayers. That means people, population, or households. And the population split, urban 70%, rural 30%. Then they go on and say, if the activity benefits the community as a whole, it is appropriate to fund that activity by the community as a whole, such as the general rate. That contradicts the first part, as if CV is used, it's 40% urban, 60% rural. That means 30% rural, subsidised, 70% urban. 2, page 30, 5.2, talking about the use of UAGC's council state. The rationale for this approach includes that the benefits of almost all council services and activities accrue to all properties equally. Therefore, council consider all properties should contribute a relative similar level regardless of the value of their property. I agree with that statement, but council don't follow through with that. Really, it's the household that benefits because most properties have a house on a small amount of land. The exception to that rule is farmers that have a house on a large amount of land because of the business they are in. By funding those functions by the general rate, see farmers pay many times more than an urban property for the same or less benefit. Featherston urban residential average 470,000 pay, general rate $702 plus 477 UAGC, where a farmer CV of 5 million with no dwelling pays 7,441 plus 477 UAGC and does not get the same benefit as the Featherston property. Council's proposal does not deliver a similar contribution per rateable property as stated above. The Featherston property pays a lot less because its CV is lower because Featherston is a less desirable place to live, not because it costs less to deliver council services and activities. The farmer pays a lot more because the large amount of land required for the business they are in, not because they use a lot more of council services or it costs more for those functions that are bulk funded by the general rate. Examples of what some categories of ratepayer will pay per function above Featherston average. Residential property of 470,000 for bulk funding of the general rate, all are plus the 477 UAGC. The functions are down the side and they are governance, the public good portion of building consents, liquor licensing, food, resource management, cemeteries, senior housing, libraries and community development. Greytown average will pay 1.54 times Featherston. Martinborough will pay 1.38 times Featherston. The farmer of 5 million will pay 10.6 times that of the Featherston. And the farmer of 2.7 million will pay 5.8. And I know one farmer who will pay 40 times more than the average urban Featherston. And don't look at those functions there. The cemeteries, I can't bury the cows in the cemetery. The governance, my cows don't vote. And the libraries, I haven't been able to teach them how to read. Council state and frequently asked questions. Council proposed one general rate is applied evenly across the district, with capital value taking care of the difference between properties. As can be seen from the above examples, that statement is not true. CV does not take care of the differences between properties. A Featherston residential average 470,000 pays $702. A $5 million property with no dwelling will pay $7,441. As long as council stay with land value or capital value, it will not deliver a fair and equitable rating system. Council have the tools to implement what they have said in page 26, 4.1 and page 30, 5.2. With the use of a UAC with a differential based on the population of urban and rural. So urban would pay 70% and rural would pay 30%. This is not a rate on population, but a rate on rateable properties. A differential can be based on anything. It can be based on how many marijuana plants you grow in your back garden. There was a large number of submissions, 70 plus, that supported this rating system. Firstly, I disagree with some of the funding needs analysis. Sports grounds, urban, halls, urban, swimming pools, urban, green spaces, urban. These functions, rural have their own and fund themselves, so don't need urban facilities as much as urban. and green spaces. Rural have many thousands of hectares. This should be funded as now by a UAC, but should be 75% urban, 25% rural. A proposal by council will see rural pay 60% and 40% by urban, and urban get the biggest benefit. Two, the rural road reserve should stay as a road reserve, but should be funded by both urban and rural, as the roads are a network used by both urban and rural. It should not be used for water or sewage. We understand that urban have big problems with water and sewage, but it is not for urban, not for rural to pay for it, which would see council's proposal, rural paying 60% of the bill. We have to deal with our own water and sewage, so urban should pay for theirs. A large majority of the submissions did not support council proposal. Urban stormwater should be funded as now 100% by urban, otherwise rural will be paying 60% of the 20% funded by the general rate in council's proposal. Again, it's their problem. They cause it, they should get rid of it. Doesn't worry rural. Dog control, it is dog owners that cause the need for dog control. So it must be them that pay, or urban should pay 80% rural, 80% and rural paying 20%. As in the present finance and revenue policy, it states urban get a higher benefit than rural. That's for dog control. Treatment of sewage should be funded 100% by those connected, as those on septic tanks pay a dump fee, so would pay twice. I believe a lot dump it in Cardigan, not in the South Wairarapa. And it's their shit. So it's for them to, they take it out to the rural area and spread it on the rural area. So it's for them to bloody fix it up, not the rural ratepayers. Cycle trails and cycleways. Council proposal would see rural paying 60%. Should be urban paying 70%, rural 30%. As it's people that use cycleways, and urban get the benefit from tourism. Could be a good tourism attraction, cycle trails and so forth. It is about time council stopped the rape and pillage of the farming industry for the benefit of urban. It is time that urban stood on its own 2 feet. Rates to a farmer are like a second mortgage. In fact, they might be a second. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. We've just run out about 10 minutes, but there may well be a question which we will take.
Can I just make a comment, because that's a very comprehensive report, Jim, and I appreciate that. It does give us some thinking that we need to consider the process, and so I do appreciate the way these things.
Well, you know, if you stick with capital and land value, it might have been okay back 100 years ago when the boroughs, you know, Featherston, Greytown and Martinborough were separate, and the county council was separate. All the farms were only little farms. Our farm originally was 60 acres. So, you know, there was a lot of 60-acre ones around. We're all similar. So the capital value would be similar. So the contribution would have been similar. This is a totally different environment we're talking about today. And I have got a thing here that I think most of you have seen, that I've done myself. I'll leave you a copy of it, showing the different categories of ratepayer and the problem that you're facing to try and get it fair and equitable. And as I say, I've come up with do it by a UAC, and the UAC must have a differential, otherwise it becomes a UAGC, right? And you can do anything with it. You can do the whole rating system with a UAC, but you can't do it with a UAGC. Okay.
Thanks, Jim.
Jim.
Thanks, Jim. That was great.
Any other questions, councillor? Okay, there being none. Now, Jim, we've had a note from your wife that she would like you to read out her submission, which she would have made. I'm going to put that to a vote. Normally, we like people who make submissions to be here in Britain. So those who are in favour, this is councillor.
There's only about 4 lines.
And that's okay. But those who are in favour of letting Jim read his wife's submission, say aye.
Aye.
You go for it.
Right. Colin has written, I believe the council should engage the whole of the community when deciding such a large issue as the rates review, as it affects all that pay rates. You need to be fair and equitable to all property owners and those that use the services pay for those services. That's her submission, but I'd also like to bring in that Bill Druzianic, unfortunately didn't put a submission in, but he's asked me if I can, rates remission on his water race. It comes into Greytown as a water race. It goes through Greytown as a stormwater system, picking up all the bits and pieces, and then is meant to go out the other end to the river as stock water again. As soon as it comes into the stormwater system of Greytown, it stays that, and it goes out through Bills as a stormwater system, not as a stock water. And I heard Alex sort of say something about, it's when there's rain and so forth, it can deteriorate, basically deteriorate. I can't remember the exact words, and then it becomes okay. No, it doesn't come better at all. It stays as stormwater going out through Bill's place, and he's the only property there, and you can say, right, we'll remit that rate for him because he's helping you out. You know, do you want him to block it off? You know, so, you know, I said I'd bring it up for you, and I thought he was going to give me something to present to you, but you know, it is hard for people to come to these sort of sessions and talk and put something together and talk in a crowd. You know, I've got over that. You know, if I make an idiot of myself, so be it. I couldn't care less. You know, but at least I've said what I want to say. You know?
And we appreciate that, Jim, we do, yeah.
Right, thank you.
And I support Federated Farms too.
Right, you support?
I support Federated Farms. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so our Federated Farmers here, please. Brilliant.
Yeah, there. Yeah, Liz is there.
Yeah. So you're next on the list. Right? Oh, now Federated Farmers is
783.
Ian, page 783. Yeah, 783. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship and Council. I'm Liz McGrady. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor at Federated Farmers. And I'll just say up front that we acknowledge submissions from individual members of Federated Farmers. Jim has just spoken, and Dan will be speaking in a moment. You will hear us repeating similar key points. I'm mindful that Council has been blessed with hundreds of submissions. So I did just want to check with you as to whether I perhaps might, I won't read the submission, but whether I might perhaps step through it a little more slowly, just mindful that not everyone might have had a chance to. Yep, I'll do that one. So just to frame it, we did summarise key recommendations at the end, and just very briefly, they're in respect of QAGC, using that to the fullest extent. It was in relation to the general rate, and it was in relation to the voting rate. So those were the big three areas that we're making recommendations on to Council. But now I will just step through the areas that we covered off in the submission and start with compliments again to council. We complimented you at the time of last year's annual plan that you had initiated, and we're following through with this rating review. I know under pressure of time, you can always duck that task from year to year to year to year and just tinker around the edges. So do commend council that you have followed through on the commitment to do this review. And I think, you know, the hundreds of responses are testament to the fact that it is a really important matter. We have certainly worked through the council documents. We can see the analysis that you've applied to thinking through the benefits. We understand and support the thinking in behind quite a number of your proposed changes. And we do make recommendations for some further refinements. So I'll step through now, just briefly highlight key points from each of the areas that we touched on. The first one is UAGC, just emphasising there that the council can use it to the full extent of 30%, and emphasising that you should indeed use it in that way for the very simple reason set out in the council papers. The benefit of almost all council services and activities accrues to all properties equally. Therefore, all properties contribute a relatively similar level, regardless of the value of the property. Now, we certainly agree with that. So just to emphasise that point, you can use it to a maximum of 30%, please do so. SUIPs, the separately used and inhabited part, we can understand where the council's thinking in respect of this, and really it's the same principle as applying, that that we've got households and the benefits are accruing to across the range of council services are accruing to the people in those households. So we do understand the thinking behind council making that proposal. Do suggest that that a definition would be useful up front in the policy, just to have that clarity for everybody, because you can get shades of grey around the edges. And we are mindful that in respect of farm properties, which might be in more than one title, that things like UAGC shouldn't be plonked on every single vacant farm title. So we've made some recommendations there about having a definition, just to provide that clarity for everybody and down the track. General rate, this is a biggie for us, and I am going to reiterate some of the points that Jim has just made very well. That council kindly provided the the table of indicative rating impact across the range of various properties, and good on you, you did heaps, high and medium and low across all the different sectors, so that was really, really helpful. And what it's really highlighted there is that accepting that the change from LV to CV is helpful. It helps balance things just a little better from 70-30 to 60-40. Nevertheless, if the general rate is levied just on capital value, the effect of that is that the 1/3 of the rural population would be paying 2/3 for all those population-based services. Or another way of saying the same thing is that for the average farming family would be paying around 4 times more than the average urban family for governance, communications, the district plan, alcohol and safe food, council facilities, cemeteries, the list goes on. So in council's analysis of the benefits of all those general rate services, we generally agree, and the descriptors of each of those are that all ratepayers and residents have the ability to benefit from this activity. So it's inappropriate that in the context of these services, which do benefit across all households, that the smaller portion of rural households and ratepayers are paying the bigger portion of the general rate. And just to pick up again on a point that Jim just made, that point that we've made in the submission here, that the average farming family would pay around 4 times more than the average urban family. Once you're outside the average, if you're on a higher CV, of course, that can go up even more in spades. And again, just to reiterate the point, be it 4 times more or 6 times more or 10 times more for governance, communication, all these public good services. So I will just emphasise that point that council in the notified version makes the point that you haven't initially looked at using differentials, but that you did anticipate that the question of differentials would come up through this process. So our strong recommendation to council is that it would be appropriate to apply differentials to the general rate, and that the appropriate precautions for deriving that differential would be to look at those population split, roughly, 2/3, 1/3 or 70/30. Moving on to targeted rates. Again, I'm actually going to reiterate points that Jim just made, and I think perhaps other submitters this morning, that in the rural setting, households pay for their water supply, pay for their septic system, pay for all that network of 3 waters. So it doesn't sit right to pay once for your own system and then to pay again for someone else's system. Moving on to roading. So in the first instance, we can understand council reasoning about the roading network being a district-wide asset. In this day and age, the population is very mobile. Unquestionably, the roading network is important for the farming sector, no doubt whatsoever about that. And it's never easy to land on proportions. Council are proposing at the moment, if I read the documents correctly, and please correct me if I have misunderstood, that the public-private benefits is 20%, 80%. And that 20% be funded through the general rate based on CV, and then the other 80% across the district, again based on CV. So we're questioning that 20%, 80%, in the context that we are looking at a district-wide asset, and in the absence of any more definitive evidence of traffic movements and road wear and things like this, which would be helpful probably to do at some point. In the absence of that, we're suggesting that perhaps a more appropriate split would be 50-50, 50% through the general rate, and noting that our recommendation for the general rate is that it be differentiated based on the population proportions, rural and urban, and that perhaps the other 50% be funded as a target rate empty across the district, as you're proposing. And is that my last point? Roading Resilience Fund, just very briefly to say that just a tiny concern, at the moment it's titled infrastructure. Does that mean that everyone chips in to help with 3 waters infrastructure? If that's what it means, that doesn't sit right. The roading network is supported, obviously sensible to have an emergency fund, and so we'll just make that point here. So just recapping, final point, 3 key recommendations: UAGC 30%, differentials be applied for general rate, and roading be split 50-50 between the general and district-wide targeted.
Now there may be some questions, so let's see if there are. Okay.
Oh, there's lots.
Very good. You are taking us through carefully. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
So our next submitter is Dan Rediford.
Do you have a question?
Thank you, Elizabeth. really very clear and helpful.
I'm disturbed.
Yes, that is.
Thanks very much, Rick. Thanks, Liz.
Welcome,
800.
Dan, and
What are we, what,
the next 10 minutes are yours.
Oh, what, sorry, what?
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
800.
219 800, page 800. Yeah. We could see it immediately.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. My views align with Federated Farmers to the greatest extent, and Liz has done a great job of covering the whole territory. I would also comment that careful regard must be made to the analysis made by Jim Headley in terms of linking activities of the council and respective benefits. So I assume everyone has read my submission, including as pages 8, 9, and 10, a rather frightening document. Dana and I attended a session by Beeford Land where the typified hill country farmer in the Wairarapa, and that is generally a better class of land than Tarwhite Station, is facing a cash loss of 174,000 unless something changes. That is bleak. Now, please read carefully what I've said there, but in the time available, I just want to focus on 3 key concepts and leave time for proper questions, because my first proposition is rated off the land. It's important to understand that clearly. As of 4 years ago, I could see that happening as an unintended consequence of carbon. For 4 years, to my knowledge, the council simply has not considered that. But now the moment is with us, and in my major submission, I point out that with the present rates burden, if land values increase as for carbon from $1,907 to $10,000, nothing changing, I could be seeing a rates demand of 200,000 a year, both councils. Now, I'd have to say it pretty bluntly, for that sort of money, I could be in and out of the High Court 5 or 6 times with a smile on my face. I am not going to be rated off the land. I'm not going lightly. And you need to accept it. And you need to accept from here, unless you will accept that the 2018 rates review was validly set, we're in for a fight. I'd rather go down fighting than with a whimper. Now, the facts as disclosed under the Official Information Act are that there are no background documents to support the proposition that there was a proper rates review in 2018. Does this council wish to argue with me today that that rates review is defensible?
What we wish to do is to hear your submission and your elaboration.
Right, I must take it that you wish to go down that track. Chapter 13 of Magna Carta said, we will not take except with the consent of the citizen or due process of law. Ever since and before Magna Carta, there was no governmental decision taken except it was written down in writing. It's black and white administrative law why do we have to waste time arguing over a legal principle that has been established for 900 years? Are there any documents to support the proposition that there was a proper rates review in 2018?
We will look into that and get in touch.
I put it as bluntly as I am because it's the most fundamental administrative law. Magna Carta has been recognised as good constitutional law in the Imperial Laws Application Act 1990. I know my territory. In 1998, I wrote an LLM paper in this area. And to have any council defend actions that are not written down is bluntly laughable. Now, I'm happy to engage because I know that once there's fundamental change and we recognise that rates review was not valid, I'm happy to talk about ways through. And you may not be thinking that this at the moment, but very deliberately I said to my neighbours, no, don't withhold rates. And it's very simple. You can do a deal with an individual, but you can't do a deal with a community of angry farmers. Very simple. In other words, way back, I realised where events were going, and there has to be some soft landings and respect for other people. The second point, and it bears on the first, so my first proposition is one, I'm motivated. It's a matter of personal survival. Two, you have a 2018 supposed rates review which has no documents and is therefore invalid, and there are consequences in that. And thirdly, the shadow of that is cast over the current review process. So by denying the 2018 review as a nullity, you are impugning your present process. Now, wishing to do my homework carefully for the benefit of the council, naturally, this is proposition number 3 and what I've just circulated. I wish to know what the working papers were going into that review process. And the council has on repeated occasions denied me under the Official Information Act the papers of Mr. Jones, stating that to be Mr. Jones's intellectual property. That proposition is so laughable that if it were true, and if Councillor Woodcock had written an angry letter to a ratepayer and somebody sought it under the Official Information Act, you now know that on the Jones precedent you can claim it to be your intellectual property and it need not be divulged. It's laughable. It undermines the whole of the Official Information Act, where the principle of the Official Information Act is free release of information. I was mulling the ludicrous nature of that. How can we contribute intelligently without knowing the working papers going into that review process? When I opened my copy of Capital Letter, and I'm very fortunate that my son Joshua is the editor, and I've enclosed the comments of the Ombudsman, Mr. Boshier, on the very question of free release of information, and councils can't hide away in working sessions. Bit by bit, key pieces of information fall into my hand, and I will keep on going and going until you look yourselves in the mirror and say we have to start over. I'm sorry to be talking to you in this tone. I would rather we moved to the last portion of this, my major submission, which deals with community rebuild, because I have some ideas, but clearly until we accept where we are, we cannot move forward. So I am clearly saying that Mr. Jones would have presented you with, I suspect, a legalistic approach as to how to avoid the clear purposes of the Local Government Act. I say clear purposes because this comes to concept 4, that people and communities matter. It's my hunch that Mr. Jones has ducked the simple proposition that there must be a correlation between people and their activities, creating a need for benefits. Bare assets like Mr. Headley's $5 million worth of bare land don't necessarily call down benefits from councils. It's people. Now, late last night, I looked at the local government official and I see that its stated purpose is in section 4, a framework for councils who decide on activities taken, accountability of local authorities to their communities, and well-being of communities. So the emphasis is on communities. And people. That's what the Act is about.
Excuse me, Jim, what I'm going to, Jim, Dan, sorry. What I'm going to do now is just check around councillors if they've got a question they would like to ask.
May I just finish on people's? What I'm saying.
I think our problem a little bit is that you have strayed slightly from submissions related to the rates review. What we will do is
This is exactly my point. I have not, I have a deep feeling that Mr. Jones's approach is to evade the purpose of the Local Government Act as in section 4, that you must be considering all peoples in your community. Now, what I find in terms of getting to know the peoples in your community is from Amanda Bradley, who's a thoughtful officer, where it was something called environmental scan. But in that 28 pages, there was no addressing the rural communities or the remote rural communities. Your process is flawed in that Mr. Jones has said you can get away with a simple division between urban and rural. It's flawed at that point, even if I'm left guessing. I'll get those documents under discovery if I have to.
thank you.
That's all.
And
Thank you.
Rebecca, we will make sure that I'll have a consultation with the Chief Executive shortly and we'll make sure you get everything that you need.
Thank you.
You've got a question?
Oh, just a very brief one, Dan, and thanks for presenting. Yeah, I'm not sure where we landed in terms of your submission, in terms of the things we went out and consulted on, because it's quite clear in your mind that that there are the way we've engaged and obviously the process which we've undertaken to get to this is not in your mind. But overall, what I'm keen to know is that you primarily support Fed Farmers' submission.
I do.
And that's really all I want to know. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Woodcock.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dan. I'd just like to reiterate first, I've never sent Dan a angry email to hide from RIA, but anyway. Just out of curiosity, where the hell were we there? You say you could see yourself getting a rates demand of 200,000 per year from both councils down the track.
Yes.
What percentage is that from our council and what would be regional council? What would be the
moving furniture on a submission with now deceased neighbour of mine, Cutfield, Greater Wellington accepted the Section 102 argument. And in the case of Tower White, dropped our rates $8,000, though that actually was a partial job. And they commissioned as a non-statutory document, I forget for the moment his surname, to do a full principles review, which they've buried away in their systems. So, short story is, at this point of time, it's approximately 2/3, 1/3, but there's a bit of looseness about what Greater Wellington has done.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah, good day, Dan. If that was the case about withholding documents, it might have saved me some embarrassment last training if I would have thought being on the front page of the paper.
So, my apologies, I've got a bit of a hearing thing in the right ear.
Yeah, no, look, I'm interested in your comments here on number 10 about carbon.
Yes.
And can you just explain that a little bit more about how you're getting these figures, and has Federated Farmers made any submissions on this to QB and so on, about where are we sitting with carbon?
With carbon, it's an unintended consequence of government's carbon policies, made worse by the fact that actually getting cash for carbon credits is a bureaucratic nightmare. Further, that in the process of getting carbon credits, a landowner is selling a property right. But yes, the simple
Can you
proposition.
explain that a little bit more?
Okay. Let's take very simple figures. Both councils, let us assume we're paying $50,000. And let us assume that that is calculated on land value. Just assume. Now, the land value per hectare that we're presently levied rates on is $1,907. And if for simple arithmetic we say that the foresters are prepared to pay $10,000 for any hectare of land for the forestry purpose, that clearly is an increase from $1,907 to $10,000, so that's a five-fold increase. A five-fold increase. So if there isn't a change in settings, then a present rate of hypothetical 50,000 would become 250,000 without any change in benefits received for an existing operation.
Yeah, so in terms of the examples you've given, the carbon part for your farm would obviously apply to areas that you've got forestry and or native bush on it, right?
A large portion, because 80% of the property is grey-waking country like the Rimataka Salmon Road, which always has been inappropriate for productive livestock farming, difficult country to farm, because it will never be capable of improvement beyond the brown top phase at 2,500 kilos of dry matter per hectare.
But is it covered in scrub and forestry at the moment, or is it still
presently covered in Manuka with isolated patches of black beech? And without going deeply into it, there is a great issue as to how much might be eligible for receipt of carbon credits.
That's sort of the question I'm asking here.
Yeah, that's exactly the.
So it's an unknown at this stage.
It's an unknown as to where the eventual figures might come out. Unless you think I'm a backward in the carbon space, let me say that 10 years ago I planted carefully chosen eucalypts on truly awful ground, and year 10 diameter breast height of my chosen species is between 200 and 250 centimeters, which frankly delights and surprises me. But the simple proposition to lodge is that I'm worried as to the unintended consequence of carbon, that without a change in settings, my present rates demand could increase fivefold.
So I suppose, and then the second part was asking if Federated Farmers had made a, and can I ask this question to get the, come forward, because obviously this is a nationwide issue with carbon farming and valuations, and it may well lead it, and I'm not saying it will, but it may well lead us down a differentiation in rating or what, something in those lines. So that's where I'm really quite interested as to what the Federated Farmers' position on this is.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, we touched on this briefly last year when we presented it at the annual plan, and you know, I've had more than one conversation with Ben about this. Ben was Inside Feds. At the moment, it's actually, you're asking an excellent question, Councillor. It is actually still a bit of an unknown quantity on a couple of levels. One is that, you know, there's a new round of evaluations, I think, due to come out in the not too distant future. And when they do those valuations, you know, there's a set of ground rules that we operate by. What's the highest and best use for this land? You're asking a really interesting specific question about Dan's property and the extent to which, if it's carbon forestry, is it eligible or not? Now, does that get factored into the QV valuation? Because we do know that in other regions, some of the valuations that have come in on the basis of carbon forestry and what was an area otherwise farmland have come in really, really high. So does that, and I can't ask that question, it's an excellent question. The extent to which it's practically realisable carbon values is distinct from, you know, potentially getting turned into a carbon forest. The other big question mark, of course, is that, you know, I'll just say frankly that the carbon forestry market has been distorted by government settings. But are they set in concrete? Well, gosh, you know, that's a moving target at the national level. So perhaps what I'd say is that when those value, it's still a moving target at more than one level. When the next round of valuations come out, that will be very interesting. That will tell us if, you know, Dan's real concerns, you know, realistic concerns, how that plays out. The implication arising then is the extent to which South Wairarapa or any other council rely principally on CV to raise rates. So
or whether we do a differentiation based on production of, whether it's a production.
Exactly, and that range of rating tools are open to you. You know, perhaps a thought in terms of timing. I think, you know, be it South Wairarapa or the other councils, everyone's doing these rating reviews, prelim to the LTP next year, and you'll be landing on the rating policy prior to going out on the LTP next year. So the new valuations turn up roughly around Christmas, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
We were promised this September in my letter from QV. Now, later than that, I've had a district council letter which says December, and which from the outside looking in strikes me as somebody has thought they wanted to keep valuation process separate from rates review.
And perhaps just
not quite transparent.
Just following that thought through, probably my question to council is, appreciating that you've got this review on the go, you've had a heap of submissions. We're actually not that far from Christmas now. I'm not sure in your timeline, is it your intention to sign on the dotted line of a new policy prior to Christmas, prior to the next set of valuations coming out, or actually when those valuations come out, it might be that, you know, you haven't quite signed on the dotted line, but that gives you a chance to digest and reflect on the options, because there are options. You know, council does have a lot of rating tools at its disposal to slice and dice of artificial, I'll call it artificial, an artificial distortion of farm properties in the district result in distorted rate takes, you know, unrelated to the benefits that people are getting. So you have got that range of tools. Yeah,
That becomes a timing issue, which is a problem.
yes.
Thanks very much, folk, and we do have more people yet.
There's one point relevantly to make. Thank you for the perceptive question. My reflection is the only way to avoid the anomalies is to have a differential area remote farming in Hinakora, differential area remote farming to Chimeri, and then you'll be able to calibrate out the effect of carbon policies. Behind that, I would suggest you should leave sufficient room in your remissions policy. If, as of today, we can't see all the variables that this new machine carbon policy is going to throw up.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you, Ken. Thank you.
So our next submitter, which is submission 221, page 818, Gary Dittmer. So I think I see Gary down the back. And welcome, Gary.
Bless you. Yeah.
Greetings.
Hello, thank you for listening. The South West District Council, along with their particular local news media, they operate together. They keep the control of their corporate information, that being only the information that they want the people to read or see. The people being the ones who elected the South Waipa District councillors and the mayor to govern their requirements, not the corporation's concepts. Their honesty. They operate with many different income figures on one subject, but never produce the expenditure figures in relation to those different income figures. Under the local government information request, you are given 2 income figures for the same year. They quoted in the local newspaper 50% increase in the last 3 years. That means 1920 income was 16.2 million. So where is the ratepayer credits for the year 17-18, where they had an income of 18.8 million, as stated under the local government Information Act? There was no hardship on Southwood Council in the lockdown. As usual, their ratepayers still paid their rates when locked up in their homes, and by some who had lost their jobs. The year 17-18, 18.8 million income gives an average payment of 2,800. Add 29.6% to it, and you get an average income, average payment of 3,600 for this year, 23-24. So where is the truth in the news media 50% increase in the last 3 years? Or will the South Waipa District Council's income be actually 36 million, not the stated 28-29 million? They say under the Local Government Information Act request, it states for year 21-22, income back then as being 27.9 million. Only 2 years back. From the time of have your say information coming out to the ratepayers, There are five more possible income figures to pick from for 23-24 income, and only one expenditure expense of 34.4 million, which is missing the rubbish collection expenditure. Their trust. You decide on the information above if it exists. Their loyalty clearly stands out on the side of Agenda 2030, the government's program, human genocide and slavery, respect. They now go for getting rid of the executives that could expose the true information or their real program. These executives have been handpicked by the South Road District councillors and the mayor in the first place. Now the council is now advanced onto the mayor for his behaviour, creating even more dissatisfaction between the ratepayers. The mayor is elected by the ratepayers. When a ratepayer attended the South Road District Council meeting to expose in have your say information, the increase of only 1% to 24.7 million for this year. The ratepayer was then threatened by the South Road Council using the use of the New Zealand Police Force to remove the ratepayer from that public meeting. Not once, but three times. They threatened that ratepayer. And not one councillor showed any concern to this threat. Not even one councillor intervened. It's so obvious this system doesn't want the ratepayers to know the truth. Integrity. How can this council be tasked with seeing to the well-being of those ratepayers, or are they attending to their own well-being, attending to theirs? Hence, loss of legitimacy. Operating without consent of its people, the ratepayers. They are now operating day by day, removing themselves slowly from their own positions in this council, whether it is by not having common sense, no intelligence, or by the control of the government above them, or is it just pure evil intent? Conclusion? So the ratepayer will have to decide for themselves which side this message is about. Public submissions are a waste of time. The council always spends most of the ratepayers' money on the consultants before consulting the ratepayers on the subject. A business can only operate or run on honesty, trust, loyalty, respect, and integrity. You would have to question what is the real message in this chief executive's quote, and I'll quote it. I thoroughly enjoy leading a team that is so very committed to doing the best it can for its community. Which community? The ratepayers or the corporation community? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. Councillor Ross?
I just have one very quick question, Gary, because you haven't covered off on a lot of things that we really want to hear in terms of.
You can't if you have. Yeah.
And what we consulted on. And so I'm very keen to know what your view is on capital versus land value rating as a tool. Have you got an answer for that or not?
My answer is the whole system is going to totally change completely.
So you don't have.
All we are duplicating is the same old mess each year. All these people are wasting their time because we're not changing the structure that's creating the problems of the people. You're all fully capable of doing here, but it's whether you have the interest to do it within you. And it's not that you would never say to me you can't. I'll tell you you can do it. It's just whether you will do it.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks.
So the biggest problem is you have to change the whole concept so these people aren't wasting their time, because you deep down inside you know that this system's not working. You're hearing it. How much do you have to hear before you make a change?
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
What we're going to do now is to take adjournment to 2:00, just so everybody can take a breather. We have one very brief piece of business. So I don't think we'll be here very much after 2. So meeting adjourned till 2.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship.